friendo, Steve here. Welcome back to Wrestle Juice. So this past Friday, right in the middle of recording a Going In Raw episode, word came from Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful that WWE had released several, I think it was 10 altogether, talents from the NXT brand. And I thought today at Wrestle Juice we'd talk about this a little bit. I don't like sort of trying to sensationalize or exploit people losing their jobs, but it's kind of interesting to take a look at it, given that WWE's new philosophy is there's going to be regular releases on a regular basis as they search for something very specific for their product. And we can take a look at some of these names and see why they didn't fit there and what the situation was. And there's some interesting twists in this case with some of the releases, WWE seemingly being a bit on the contradictory side when it comes to people who kind of don't want to be there. So obviously months ago, Mustafa Ali had publicly said, hey, I want out. You guys aren't using me right. There was reports that he had some big blow up meeting with Vince McMahon where they were yelling at each other or something like that over a character that he had wanted to portray. And then Vince wanted to change it into something probably grotesque. Who knows? It's Vince McMahon. Look at his history, et cetera, et cetera. And Mustafa Ali sat out for quite a spell, a couple months. And then just this past week, they brought him back. Ironically, of course, in the same week, they release at least two people who didn't want to be there anyways. So we're going to take a look at these names. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and that like button, and that notify bell, because you always get notified when there's new Going In Raw content. Wow, I just said Going In Raw. This is Wrestle Juice. That's not, well, let's get started here. First up, Dakota Kai. According to Fightful, Dakota Kai had actually indicated she had told WWE she had no plans on re-signing there. And so there's kind of like two stories happening. On one hand, she has said that she was not planning on re-signing there. On the other hand, according to Dave Meltzer, the WWE, she had some dark match sort of main roster tryouts. And the officials there were like, we don't really have anything for her here on main roster. And she had been in NXT since like 2015 or something. And so this kind of felt like a mutual thing. Like WWE had nothing for her. She didn't want to be there. Maybe she didn't want to be there because they had nothing for her. Who knows? I feel like Dakota Kai is one of the bigger dropped balls in NXT. And it seemed like her feud with Raquel Gonzalez, now Raquel Rodriguez, was shaping up to be between the Raquel Gonzalez thing and the Shayna Baszler thing. It feels like Dakota Kai kind of had two opportunities, or creative rather, had two opportunities with her to tell sort of a women's division version of Ciampa Gargano, especially with Gonzalez, given that they were best friends. Dakota Kai turned on her. And it seemed like they were really ramping up for that. And then 2.0 happened and they just had to drop that. They brought them back together for another day as tag team champions, and or 2 days or whatever it was. And then they lost those titles as well. Raquel Gonzalez became Rodriguez up there on main roster. And now Dakota Kai is out of the company. So it's kind of interesting. You know, she had the bullying storyline with Shayna Baszler, and then Baszler sort of got called up before they could really do a whole lot more with that, although it feels like that should have been a really hot feud. And then the feud with Gonzalez, that could have been, I really feel like Triple H was building that to be a big sort of main event level feud, perhaps for the title. And then that never came to pass. Kind of surprising that in all that time, Dakota Kai, they never figured out a way to put that title on her, because she is a terrific wrestler. I don't really know what the deal with that was. She was also versatile as a character. She could sort of play a bunch of different things as she displayed over the years. So it's kind of interesting to me that they couldn't find something to give her. She has a very loyal, large, dedicated fan base, which is another reason why it's weird that they wouldn't have brought her up to main roster. So I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe she just sort of was like, God, I'm tired of this place. Like, they don't really know what to do with me. And main roster WWE officials were like, yeah, we don't really know what to do with you either. And so, you know, she's got a really big following on Twitch, and I'm sure she'll have whatever she wants to do on the outside. of WWE. There's a lot of great opportunities out there outside the WWE system. So hopefully she'll, succeed in one of those areas. I think she's got a lot of options ahead of her. So she's got that. Malcolm Bivens was also released. Again, a situation where, according to Fightful Select, he had actually told WWE that he had not planned on re-signing there. They tried to get him to re-sign like in February or something like that, and he said no. Remember, this guy spent 2 years doing nothing, literally not being on TV, which was bizarre. You bring Stokely Hathaway in, and who's a known talker. He's main roster ready as a manager immediately, and then they did nothing with him for 2 years. That was weird. That was actually very weird. He was managing Diamond Mine. There are reports, of course, according to Fightful Select as well, that they had main roster plans for him to manage perhaps Amos before MVP ended up taking that spot and some other things. And apparently he was like, no, there's too many other things I'd rather be doing than basically taking the bet or gambling that WWE is gonna use him, as opposed to him re-signing and them just not doing anything with him. So yeah, that one kind of makes sense as well. If I'm just sitting there and not being able to sort of build my own, if you want to call it brand, whatever you want to call it. I know some people cringe at that word, but whatever, it's part of the lexicon now. If you're just sitting there for 2 years doing nothing, man, I don't know. That's gonna rub me the wrong way. Next up, Dexter Lumis. Of course, he's been featured in main events. He has been in some title scenes here and there. He was just in a prominent storyline as part of sort of the whole Duke Persia thing, and she's been released too now. We'll talk about that in a second. And then, of course, Dexter and Indy Hartwell. Kind of a blow to Indy Hartwell, because not only is her on-screen best friend gone in Persia Parada, and now her on-screen husband, Dexter Lumis, who is, of course, part of that big wedding angle they did right at the tail end of NXT 1.0. With Dexter Lumis, the way they presented him, there's a very limited ceiling there, because on one hand, he's a serial killer. On the other hand, he's a caricature artist. And melding those into like a comedy character, I don't know how much further you can go with that. I'm actually, to be honest with you, kind of surprised they were able to get out of him, out of that character, what they did for as long as they did. Either you have the dude start talking and give him some dimension and complexity, or you're not going to find much to do with him beyond just the thumbs up and the thumbs down stuff. Like it's like, okay, he showed up. I get it. He's a serial killer. Now what? Now what do you do? So this one, I'm not really surprised. It's sad. He's got an amazing look. He's a really fun wrestler. I understand WWE's trying to skew younger right now for main roster, and it's not like he can be a manager like an LA Knight and Sam Shaw, Dexter Lumis. He's like not the youngest guy, comparatively speaking, to the main roster in the world, but still kind of surprising that they opted to limit him creatively as much as they did, but they did get a good couple of years out of him. So again, he's the kind of guy, it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up outside of the WWE. I think he'll probably have quite a few options. Again, he's got that great look. I'm assuming that they'll be able to showcase more of his character, his personality anywhere else than WWE, because that was just sort of a one-dimensional thing they did. Moving on, Harland Parker Boudreaux was last seen with Joe Gacy. Of course, when this guy sort of arrived at WWE at NXT in the Performance Center, all the pictures of him made people think this guy looks like sort of a pseudo Brock Lesnar type. Unfortunately for Harland, the word is, according to Dave Meltzer, I believe this might have been part of Fightful Select. I don't know. They both report a bunch of stuff. WWE officials were not happy with how he was progressing in ring. As a viewer and consumer of NXT, I was never thrilled with how he was progressing in the ring. Look, wrestling is not easy. It's not for everybody. You got to have a bit more than a good look. And in his first match, he had like one move. In his second match, he had one move. And it was like just smashing his elbows into a guy's head. There wasn't a lot there in the ring. And he had been in there developmental for a little while now. So I'm not sure why he wouldn't have been catching on a little quicker. Again, wrestling ain't for everybody. It's not something that everybody can do. Professional wrestling, telling stories in the ring, it's not easy stuff, I would imagine. It's not for everybody. This guy seemingly he couldn't connect it. I don't know what the deal is with that, but like you can only get so much out of a guy who just stands there and looks menacingly. Joe Gacy has seemed to have moved on with a bunch of druids as his heavies. So yeah, as far as what he's going to do outside of wrestling, I don't know. I mean, one thing about the situation outside WWE is that you kind of like you need to be able to wrestle. Like everywhere else, wrestling is kind of a bit more important. Like in WWE, you can have an Amos, right? Big giant guy, really doesn't wrestle all that much. He just sort of stumbles about. He could take a bump. He took a bump against Lashley. But you can have the attraction types in WWE a bit more, I think, than on the outside, right? Like, I don't know if this guy is going to show up. I don't know. Maybe MLW could do something with him. I don't know. I just don't know what he's going to do. I don't know. It's not like he's got all that big of a name value either, necessarily. So I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Harland. But I guess we'll see. Best of luck to the guy. Persia Parada. This was kind of surprising because on one hand it is, and on one hand it isn't. If you look at WWE's main roster's women's tag scene, it's loaded with thrown together tag teams because that's their women's mid card. They take singles wrestlers, put them together, and then there's your tag teams. And I think that's why, for example, Casey Catanzaro, Katana Chase now, is that her name? And Caden Carter haven't been called up to main roster because they're an actual women's tag team, which is a rarity in WWE. So I don't know what's going to happen with them either. But Indy and Persia were a pretty good tag team. But if you take them apart as singles competitors, I can see some sort of similarities there superficially anyways. And maybe they just like, hey, we got a good thing with Indy and you're kind of redundant. I don't know. I hate to say that, but that might be the thinking of the WWE, officials or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I feel bad for Indy Hartwell. I'm sure she's going to continue to succeed. She's very young. She's a really good wrestler. She's got tons of charisma. So it wouldn't shock me to see her just get called up because that probably should happen. Or they'll put her up there in the title scene, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, this one was kind of a head scratcher just because they were all in a story together. Her, Persia, and Indy and Duke Hudson. I don't know what Duke Hudson's going to do now. Maybe they'll put him with Indy. I don't know. They'll console each other and find romance again because the idea was they used to date. Couple other names here. Draco Anthony. He was just sort of he was finding his legs on TV. He had only been featured a little bit. He was a guy who had arrived at the gym really early or really late or something. And then he was in a really brief feud with Joe Gacy. And then that turned into a feud with Zion Quinn. And then Zion Quinn moved on to Wes Lee. And then it was like, okay, well, what's Draco Anthony going to do? I don't know. I don't, you think that you would want, a guy who had some amount of charisma, which I believe he did, trained by Booker T, could do some really cool stuff in the ring. You would think that they would want a guy like that, but maybe they felt again, young guy, very athletic, a bit of charisma. Maybe they didn't feel like they saw enough of all that stuff. And there was other people who had more of it. That's the only thing I can think. I honestly don't know, but hopefully he's going to have some options ahead of him. I imagine if he hits the indie scene, he can continue to sort of build on what he's already done. He's got TV behind him, so that's going to be a draw for some promotions. So I think that he's the kind of guy, Draco Anthony, if he plays his cards right, he could leave WWE, really build himself into something pretty good. Maybe go to New Japan or any of the promotions in Japan and see what's out there for him, and then maybe in a couple of years come back to WWE as somebody who has established his name outside, and he's still probably pretty young. I don't know exactly how old he is, but I imagine he's probably in his mid-20s. So it's not too late for him to come back around to the WWE system. Besides, in a couple of years, WWE is probably going to be accepting 40-year-olds again anyways, because you know how they are. They sort of change their minds on everything. Moving on, a couple other names that were released. Referee Blair Baldwin, a.k.a. Chloe Christmas. Mila Milani, Kelly Morga. Raylan Devine, also known as Jalen Williams. And Vish Kanya, also known as Sanjana George. I didn't really see, maybe some of these people made it to Level Up. I'm not sure. Didn't really see any of them on TV. If they did, they didn't leave an impression. I mean, this is going to happen when you bring in a bunch of like athletes and whatnot. You assign them to developmental deals. Some of them are going to end up getting released before they even see the light of day or even get a character or whatever. So, that kind of stuff. that happens. Hopefully, if they enjoyed their experience wrestling, they'll go and find it somewhere else. If not, I don't know. I didn't really know. But yeah, hopefully they got something out of the experience of being in WWE. Look, man, it's never cool when somebody gets their job, they lose their jobs. I've been laid off before, and it sucks. But, the thing is, man, sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. You go out and you make a better life for yourself or something. That's terrible. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Anyways, check out one of these other videos over here or down here. What did I do last time? I did a Q&A about AEW's TNT title. Are they ruining it? Short answer, no. You want the long answer? Go check out that video. We'll see you over there.